Nick, we're going to come to your book in a minute. They'll have to start with one sort of aspect of the astonishing fortunes that were accumulated by founders of tech companies. Elon Musk, again, the richest man in the world. Larry Ellison only had that for a few minutes. Said what many people would say were some astonishingly toxic things at the weekend. About British people having to sort of take up arms to defend themselves against sort of far-left extremists. What do we do about his kind of his interventions?
Well, I think we should call it out. One of the great ironies, I think, of modern politics is the nationalists, certainly in the United States, operate very transnationally. They interfere in other people's elections. They interfered in the German elections. Musk, supported the AfD. Vance met the AfD leader before he met Merz, the then Chancellor. They interfered in the Polish election. And they're now inserting themselves into British politics. And if you look at the way in which Tommy Robinson sort of fawned on Musk, look at the way in which Farage fawns about Trump, they're seeking to turn this country into sort of little MAGA Britain. And I think we need to be just much clearer in calling out that this is, in whatever shape or form, a form of extraterritorial interference into our democratic culture, which they would never countenance, which they would never tolerate in the United States. And, of course, the government has to be somewhat tongue-tied because they've got to respect the normal sort of diplomatic niceties. But I do hope that privately, if not publicly, might be better if it was done a little publicly at times, the Prime Minister says very, very categorically to the United States, to Donald Trump, that this interference in our democratic debate might be welcomed by Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage, but is not welcomed by the vast majority of the British people.
But Trump himself is highly unlikely to either try to stop Musk, or even if he did try, it's very unclear that it would have any effect. And there are plenty of British people who apparently applaud what Musk says. So what do we do about it?
Well, you don't win an argument without engaging in it, is certainly my experience. I'm no longer in public life, but if you let people sort of establish facts on the ground by default in politics, you're only to blame if you don't engage with that. And I think what we are seeing, in my view, is the sort of Trumpification of European politics. It's not just here. It is very plausible to imagine in a relatively short period of time that Le Pen will be president of France, if not her sidekick, that Wilders might win in the election in Holland next week. The AfD just tripled its vote in the North Rhine-Westphalia state election yesterday in Germany, and that Nigel Farage may be Prime Minister of this country, or at least very close to it. And clearly, in ways that I'm sure you've analysed on this programme multiple times, the old cleavages of politics, of left and right, and the red team and the blue team, are breaking down into something way more complex. But I do think when the most powerful country in the world asserts itself or inserts itself into our democratic debate and imposes itself in that way, yes, we are a lot smaller, we're not as powerful, we're not as rich, but we have every right to speak up and say, this is not something which we want in our democratic culture in the United Kingdom.
Now, you've just published a book called How to Save the Internet. I suspect that quite a lot of people watching this programme will say they don't want the internet saved, but we'll come down to the sort of core argument there in a minute. But you do say that some of the attacks on social media are overdone, but just based on your own analysis about the rise of parties that many people would regard as extremist, very unlikely, frankly, that we would have the rise of these supposed extremists across the Western world were it not for the way that social media amplifies their voices.
Yeah, this is an exceptionally difficult one because historically that's clearly not the case. And we had horrendous extremism and polarisation in Europe in the 1930s. Our continent drenched itself in blood twice in world wars in a matter of decades.
We also had in that period the rise of mass media, and this is a different kind of mass media.
Yeah, but I don't think it... Well, I mean, you're quite right. People used to say that the radio was the reason behind fascism because it was the favourite tool of propagandists and fascists. So you are right to say that historically, and I describe this in the book as dispassionately as I possibly can, that each form of of new technology by which we communicate as human beings, that all sorts of things are ascribed to that technology to explain events. Now, you clearly...
But that said, let's be clear. Social media,
Yeah.
how concerned are you that they have, as I say, amplified, fueled this trend?
I think what social media brought, which is new and is very liberating and emancipating on the one hand, but clearly extremely disruptive and unsettling on the other hand, is it introduced mass virality. What does that mean? It means that you can... it's not just a newspaper editor or a political leader or a religious leader has the right to speak. Everybody does. We all do. We could all post on social media, and if it catches the wind or if it's indeed algorithmically promoted, it can be seen by vast numbers of people in a very short space of time. I think that definitely is materially and qualitatively new. And
just to be clear, do you have any... For quite a long time, Meta said it's a platform, not a publisher. Terrible lies have been published on many platforms, not just Meta's, which have not been challenged, but have gone, just been taken up as truth across the world. Do you not now have regrets, anxieties about all of this?
So certainly anxieties, but again, it's not a new phenomenon. I think it's been turbocharged by social media. What's that old phrase? A lie makes its way halfway around the world before the truth has even got its boots on. That was said in the pre-internet age. That's clearly accelerated. I would think of social media in many respects as an accelerant for a lot of trends, and they could be good trends and they can be bad trends. I personally am... I would say this, but I'm extremely proud of the work that I and others did to try and get the balance right so that you try and minimise, you're never going to eliminate the bad, whilst amplifying the good.
Although we noticed, you left as soon as Trump became president, and we all noticed that the attempts to, in a sense, turn the dial down were thrown out the window by Meta and by some of the others.
Not entirely, but it's certainly true that the kind of decisions which are being taken, would I take them? Probably not in the same way. And I certainly wouldn't be any help in Silicon Valley trying to navigate the Trump administration, Trump 2, though I was there during Trump 1, which felt very different. Yeah. But anyone who wants to dive into this, I try and as dispassionately as possible lay out the claim and counterclaim. It is, of course, daft to pretend that these technologies don't have a profound influence. I just sometimes worry that people say it's almost easy to imagine just a little tweak with the algorithm and all would be well and everyone would be nice to each other. I'm afraid I don't think that sort of techno-determinism has ever been true, and I don't believe it's true today.
Now, there's much more I need to talk to you about, but first, Pippa's going to share some relevant information with us.
Yes, Robert. Now, in August, Donald Trump said on his Truth Social platform that he would stand up to countries attacking US tech firms with taxes or regulations, show respect or consider the consequences. And by that, of course, he means tariffs. And maybe the government will be worried, as we do have an additional tax on tech firms like Amazon and indeed Meta. Since it was introduced, it has generated a relatively modest revenue of £2.5 billion. And the OBR, which scores the government's policies, say it will raise another £5.3 billion by the end of the decade. Now, that's not a lot compared to other taxes, but when the government almost certainly has to raise them elsewhere, the Chancellor would probably rather hang on to it. And the general public also don't want to back down on big tech. 67% of people would rather we continue enforcing our rules, even if it harms relations with the US. Robert.
So, Nick, just on that, there has been a lot of pressure on the government to either reduce the digital services tax or abolish it altogether. Starmer should stand firm?
I think he should. Whether every provision and every new regulation is sensible or not, let's set that aside. Do I think it is important for our own sovereignty, and dare I say it, for the sovereignty, we're out of the EU now, alas, but for Europe as a whole, to govern the digital space as we see fit? I think that is right. And of course,
including taxation.
Well, including taxation. Here's the interesting thing. Donald Trump has a totally one-eyed view of trade. He only thinks about trade in goods. It's slightly different with the UK, but the US runs a very big deficit in goods with Europe, with the European Union, which is why he slaps taxes on German cars and agricultural products and all the rest of it. And yet yet Europe runs a huge deficit in services, particularly banking and tech, with the United States. And yet the moment Europeans, including Brits, say that they want to impose taxes on the export of US services in exactly the same way, analogous way at least, that the Americans are imposing taxes on US goods, it's considered, on EU goods, it's considered to be an outrage. And I think the more, again, I'm sure he needs to do this privately, the more the Prime Minister can sort of impress upon the Americans that trade is both goods and services, and that you need to look at it in the whole, I think he might be able to have more purchase in explaining why our measures are not as egregious as Donald Trump appears to think they are.
Now, if I said we were almost out of time, I've got a couple of questions, one very short, one I'd like you to keep as short as possible in terms of your answer. Your big argument is that the internet is fragmenting. This is mostly, certainly in my view, about the tech war between China and America. Why should we worry about it?
Because the internet that most people, I think, value is based on the idea of openness, that it recognises no borders, that you can send a picture, you can send a post. We're now, of course...
Although we've already talked about how, in some ways, the lack of borders amplifies lies.
Yes. My own view is that having a splinternet, which just gets balkanised, you already have a Chinese internet, a Russian internet, increasingly you're going to have a Turkish internet, a Vietnamese internet. The big swing vote here will be India. Will India go in a Chinese direction and try and
What's your hunch?
Well, I think because of the extraordinary cack-handed diplomacy of the Trump administration, you're seeing this extraordinary spectacle of the leader of the world's largest democracy, Modi, driven into the hands of the world's largest autocracy. He turned up in Beijing the other day. Indian troops are now playing a role in military exercises in Belarus, just right today. So far, the signs are not great, but I think it is overwhelmingly in Europe and America's interest to re-establish good relations with India and try and keep the internet, or at least the non-Chinese internet, as open as possible.
Now, here's my final quick question. You worked in Silicon Valley, you spent years in Parliament. Where are there more narcissists and sharks?
More narcissists? I think they're fairly evenly distributed in both places.
Nick Clegg.
Photo finish.
OK, great to see you. All the best.
Thank you.
Be sure to like, subscribe and turn on all post notifications to catch the ills, spills and thrills of the mad, mad world of politics.